Morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Templey, a lead electronics engineer from Partner Electronics. I'm pleased to have been asked to pop in here today to give you an opening introduction to wireless technologies in industry. So a little bit about me and the company. I've been with Partner Electronics since I graduated for about 5.5 years. And in that time, I've worked on electronics projects across a wide range of market sectors, technologies, that sort of thing, including medical tech, industrial tech, oil and gas industries. I could go on. But importantly, I suppose, recently we've completed a design of a wireless building sensor and other Bluetooth streaming devices at the company. The company itself is located in Silverton Village and is a member of the STC. We're a close team of electronics engineers with all sorts of experiences and skills that we can apply to different clients' products, including hardware design, software development, and we specialize in integrating with our clients to deliver the best product possible for the market. Founded in 2007, originally here in the Innovation Centre, we're now just based in Silverton Village. So why do people go for wireless technology? Well, generally wireless tech brings a lot of benefits over their sort of wired installation alternatives. The big one being cost. Very simply, you don't have to pay for the cost of cabling installation and all of that sort of infrastructure, and they can be generally cheaper to maintain. And while the devices themselves may appear expensive on their own, this cost sort of is outweighed by the reduction in installation costs and the other benefits that it brings. And wireless devices can also reduce the occurrence of sort of product damage, returns, that sort of thing in the field due to wiring faults, due to the simplicity that they bring in terms of setup. Another benefit is the flexibility of the technologies. You can pick the technology best suited to your application, whether you're looking for long-range data transfers, short-range bulk data transfers, or sort of office-scale Internet of Things and monitoring. And if a device you find isn't performing quite as well as you'd hoped in a certain location, maybe it's not getting the best temperature or humidity readings you'd hope for, you can just pick it up and move it. It's very flexible like that. It sort of moves into mobility as well. Wireless techs are inherently mobile, and a lot of IoT devices, that sort of thing, are intended to be used on the move. For example, pallet monitoring in industrial warehousing, that sort of thing. And the final one I've got here is scalability. Sort of links back to cost, but if you need to increase your installation in size, either with more nodes or greater physical coverage, wireless technologies are much easier to do this sort of changes with. Before I get into specific technologies, I'm just going to do a quick overview of the sort of basic topologies of wireless networks. So our first one we have is peer-to-peer. Literally device to device direct, for example, classic Bluetooth, that sort of thing. You've then got meshing networks, for example, ZigBee, sometimes referred to as many-to-many networks. You can send data from device A to device B, but you don't have to do that directly. You can piggyback off of other devices in your mesh, which means you can change routing paths around that network dynamically. So you can pick devices up, you can move them, and the system themselves will handle this change and still ensure that your data gets back to your central hub. And the third one, sort of a mop-up, local and wide area networks. Wi-Fi is probably a best example of this. Common setup, you have a central server and a bunch of client devices that all feed into that. As I said, examples of peer-to-peer networks, you've got classic Bluetooth. The other big one you've got is NFC, but there's quite a lot of different examples in here that we could touch on. The performance of these technologies individually very much depends on that technology and what you're trying to do with it. You can get a really quite broad ranges of data rate options, operating ranges, power consumptions within this sort of topology. Meshing networks, your best example is probably Bluetooth Low Energy, Bluetooth 5, and ZigBee. These are usually your best solution for generally low power over a short distance. ZigBee itself is a particular favorite of the Internet of Things community for covering large physical areas with many devices all meshed together into a single gateway. ZigBee tends to be a sort of lower data rate option than Bluetooth, which is more suited to, for example, audio streaming, that sort of thing. But generally low power, short range, and high physical coverage with a high number of nodes. And then to cover some of the other LANs, WANs out there, Wi-Fi, cellular are your big two. And the other one I'm going to make a point of mentioning today is LoRa, which is a little bit different. But generally, these technologies deliver moderate to very long ranges, high data rates, with the caveat being they tend to be more power hungry than their other peer-to-peer and meshing counterparts. For example, consider how much power your smartphone goes through when you're streaming a video on mobile data. The exception here is LoRa. This is a radio technology designed specifically for low power applications with very long ranges. LoRa stands for long range. We at Pell have recently developed a LoRaWAN based sensor, which can achieve multiple years of battery life and an operating range of approximately a mile in open air. So generally, these networks give you moderate to very long range, high power, with the exception of LoRa, but they give you high physical coverage with a lower number of nodes in the system. Got some quick comparisons of the networks I've just mentioned there. So first one here being range. Generally consider cellular to be the longest range option of all of them, with NFC very much being the short range. In the middle, ZigBee, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth are all fairly similar in terms of their sort of average operating ranges. Bluetooth 5 is an improvement on classic Bluetooth thanks to its meshing nature over the peer-to-peer nature of Bluetooth Classic. But even so, Wi-Fi, ZigBee tend to give you better operating ranges. One note I'll make here is that this comparison is all done with networks operating in open air. Wireless technologies are all affected differently by the sort of environment they're in, the materials surrounding them, that sort of thing. And I'll touch on that a little bit more when I consider the frequencies in use in a couple of slides' time. Second comparison I've got is data rates. Cellular, Wi-Fi boast the highest possible data rates of these six. It's best suited for your streaming videos, online gaming, that sort of thing. Skipping a bit further down, you've got Bluetooth, which is your technology of choice generally for audio streaming, headphones, speakers, etc. ZigBee and LoRa are then better suited for lower data rate, short bursts of data, situation monitoring, environment monitoring, that sort of thing. And then finally at the bottom, NFC, which is most commonly used in sort of your contactless cards, where you'll literally tap and go, really short bursts, really small packets of data. The third parameter that I haven't got a direct comparison for here is power consumption, but that's because effectively power, data rate and range are all inherently linked. Generally, as you go increasing data rate or you go increasing the operating range, you will see an increase in power consumption. So choosing the right wireless technology to give you the right balance of these three is really important to meet the needs of your application. My final comparison I've got here is development cost, which is all to do with getting a product developed, tested, and into the market. You've got many costs in that path to consider, from the engineering effort to design the electronics, and then the cost of the physical modules, to the cost of putting the devices through all the required certification testing. The costs for cellular devices tend to be dominated by the last one there, the certification cost, and generally cellular devices are the most expensive to develop. By comparison, ZigBee, LoRa, it's normally the modules that are the more expensive, or certainly more expensive than cellular, but they're a little bit more straightforward to certify. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, again, the module cost generally comes down, and they're really well-known networks now. Test houses, etc., are really used to certifying these sorts of modules. So again, that brings down the cost of certifying those. NFC tends to require very little in terms of certification costs, especially if your device implements what's known as a passive tag. Like a contactless card, you basically need no radio certification at all there. In terms of frequency plans, it's important to consider the frequencies in use and which technology you're going for. as I've mentioned before, it can have a noticeable effect on the performance of your network. For example, if you're using it indoors. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, ZigBee are all based on 2.4 gigahertz bands, sort of a universal frequency band. LoRa makes use of a 868 megahertz band in the UK and the EU, 915 in the US and Canada. ZigBee can also make use of those frequencies if needed, but it tends to prefer the 2.4 gigahertz option. The reason the choice of carrier frequency is key is the higher the frequency, they tend to struggle to penetrate different building materials, for example, bricks and that sort of thing. So the choice of frequency in LoRa is one of the key reasons it can achieve its long range and why it's a great choice for building monitoring and that sort of thing. I'm sure many of you have experienced poor Wi-Fi performance in offices and homes as you go moving around the building, as you move further from the router, because your 2.4 gigahertz carriers are more easily attenuated by walls, ceilings, etc. This sort of phenomenon is what we refer to as penetrating power, how well the wireless technology can propagate through different environments, through different materials. Meshing networks like ZigBee can work around or overcome penetrating power issues of 2.4 gigahertz through the meshing nature. So simply by putting more nodes in the mesh, you can increase the coverage and you can mitigate the sort of the attenuation of that 2G. Slightly different to simply putting a Wi-Fi booster in your room, which literally just receives signal, amplifies it, sends it on its way. Just for completeness, I've got the frequencies for cellular and NFC as well. So cellular covers a very, very wide range of different frequency bands, but the most sort of common 900 megahertz for your standard phone signal 3G networks, 2.6 gigahertz for your 4Gs, and 3.4 gigahertz for 5Gs. But these do vary depending on network provider as well. And NFC is a far lower frequency band by comparison at 13.56 megahertz, which is part of the reason for its very, very low data rates. In terms of product approvals for wireless products, in the UK and the EU, your product needs to comply with RED, the Radio Equipment Directive. And for the US, radio products are required to pass FCC testing and obtain an FCC number, which must then be labelled on the product. Both of these must be done alongside your standard product approvals, your EMC, your electrical safety, etc. Generally, it's much easier to go about certifying a product in the radio market if you use pre-approved wireless modules. These are modules that the manufacturers have already put through the tests for RED, for FCC, and can provide data on how they perform. And then basically you put these in your product, you take your product to the test house, and all you have to really prove is that you don't inherently damage the performance of this module when it's in your product. So using these modules should increase the simplicity of your certification and generally bring the cost of that down. I've got a couple of example applications as well, just to sum up. So an increasingly popular example of wireless technology now, wireless earbuds. I'm sure everyone's come across these. So these are devices which are intended to be very small, especially from an electronics point of view, rechargeable battery-powered devices. These devices tend to always use Bluetooth Low Energy for their wireless comms, mainly for two reasons. 2.4 gigahertz is that universal frequency band, so you can develop one product, sell it around the world. You don't have to certify it at different frequencies for the UK, for the US, etc. And it also gives you that sort of perfect balance of range, data rate, and power consumption, as I mentioned before. Data rate for audio streaming is enough range to get from your ear to your pocket or your ear to your desk, and power consumption which gives what we as consumers would consider an acceptable battery life, sort of tens of hours of constant streaming. The other example application I've got is based on LoRa and NFC. So this is an example of a LoRaWAN building sensor which has recently hit the market and its associated gateway. LoRaWAN is a secure network protocol built upon the LoRa radio technology. It's just an efficient, simple method of having these devices talk in a secure manner. These sensors boast approximately 4 years of battery life from a couple of lithium AA batteries and a range in open air of a couple of kilometers. So they're perfectly suited to cover whole office blocks, apartment blocks, that sort of thing, only requiring a single hub device. The NFC side of these sensors is used for the configuration and the installation to make that really simple. So simple smartphone app to input the necessary security details, etc., and then installer scans and taps, and then transfers all the security data across the device. So this makes these as a product very simple for commissioning, etc., to be done. Dead simple, walk around, scan your devices. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been a good introduction to wireless technologies, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Yes. Thank you very much. I was very useful because I'm talking about development roadmaps. We started off thinking Bluetooth, but actually, well, we have been using Bluetooth, but NFC is definitely something that's coming up in the future as a way that we can have a sealed box with everything in it. But yeah, I'll come to that in a second. Yes, my name's Tristan Collins. CEO of gaitQ, and gaitQ is a spin out from the University of Oxford. We found about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And we've set out developing wearables for neurological conditions. The initial focus is Parkinson's, but we're not stopping there. To set the scene, we're getting older, society is aging, and then all the issues that come along with that are also then on the increase. So changing demographics. And a side effect of that is that neurological disorders are on the increase. Neurodegenerative diseases, they're increasing with the aging population. And I could pick some huge numbers. Falls in people with Parkinson's in the US, 65 billion. In the UK, 4.4. Yeah. Whatever you look at it, there's a huge number in old people and preventing falls, basically. Because it's not just the fall, it's the cost of care. It's the time they spend in hospital, it's the 2, 3, 4 years after the fall. Yeah, it's a huge number. But the positive thing is wearables can help. We're all familiar with, I suppose, Apple Watches and Fitbits. I can see various bits of technology around the room, which could be defined as a wearable device, and indeed are now being certified as medical devices. That can be worn in various locations on the body to collect data. And it's this data that is going to be of interest in healthcare in the future. It's going to be looking at that data, spotting trends, seeing if you can head off these issues earlier. And basically, to me, it's a true use of IoT. So the more people you have wearing a medical device, the more data you collect, the more information you'll be able to find out, and you can stratify and segment, and you can do all the clever stuff that this stuff was meant to. It was why it was built in the first place. Apple are doing this, Google are interested in it. Yeah, everyone's interested in this. So we've gone and made one. This is our first product, gaitQ Tempo. To give you, that's the size of it. One of these is worn on each leg, just behind the knee, below on the calf. I have a set, so after the lunch, whatever, if you want to try it, come and we can give it a go. You can be a victim of it. So what this is it's an active cueing device for people with Parkinson's. People with Parkinson's tend to suffer from what's known as gait freezing. So you could be walking along a street, something can happen, you can change road surface, or the surface can change from a dark to a light tarmac, and that's enough to trigger your freezing. And what that freezing does is basically your legs your feet are stuck to the floor, and you fall over. Or you have a wobble. A fall could be as bad as a wobble. A wobble means you lose confidence, and you might not go out for your daily walk the next day because you don't want to have that happen again. And so what tends to happen is people lose confidence. They go out less, and instead of being the active, go-getting type person, they sort of become reclusive. They don't go out. And then you get the increased burden of mental health issues. And the important thing generally of people with Parkinson's is to keep going. So our device going to be UK market ready in 4 weeks if our suppliers deliver what they're meant to deliver on time, but it's another story. For clearance in the UK, and then we're hoping FDA clearance shortly after to allow us to at least initiate sales in the US. I'm going to show a video next. This is the video that basically started the journey for me because it shows the impact of what we're trying to do, and indeed why wireless tech in general, which is the reason we're here, can help. This is a chap. Unfortunately, he has now died, but this just shows you, how bad this disease can be. This was taken in late 2019. This chap had fairly advanced Parkinson's, and on the left is the video of his normal walking. That's the best he can do. And I have to sometimes go and stand next to it to show that, look, it's actually moving. But that's his walking. And then he freezes. So he's trying to move, but he can't. And you can tell by his trouser jiggling. And the physio's trying to get him to take his next step. But he's stuck. And imagine what this means for that chap if, like, the Amazon man rings the doorbell and you've got to get to your door. You're going to be flustered. This is going to happen. You're going to fall. And unfortunately, for many of these people, you get fined 2 weeks later when a concerned neighbour wonders why they haven't seen you. And this is happening all too frequently. So what we did with this chap is we, in the video on the right, put 2 of the sort of lab prototype devices on his leg. And you can see it makes quite a difference for this chap. And in fact, the video on the left is still going, and it can still go for well over 2 minutes. So when I saw this, I thought, right, there's a market here. We need to get this on people. Because if we can replicate this across various stages of Parkinson's, we can make a difference to people. What if we could have the same impact in the real world? What if we get this out of the clinic and into the home? And what, with the data that we're collecting, these things are just sensors collecting a lot of accelerometer data and so on. What if we could use that data and help them manage their conditions remotely? So the mantra we've come up with is we want people with Parkinson's to walk better, improve their walking, walk more, do more of it, and then fall less. So to people with Parkinson's, and actually also dementia and various other conditions, staying mobile and active is the challenge. As I said, once you have a wobble and you lose confidence, everything goes downhill. Activity is key to delaying disease progression. And activity, it could be walking, or it could even be singing. It could be also any part of the disease you want to stay active. And what we've developed is a smart queuing platform. This is the bit where the IP comes in. We have some technology that allows us to record the data, process the data, and be able to then apply the right cue to the right place at the right time. And so the right place, lower leg, because that's what you associate with walking. The right time is hopefully just before you're about to freeze. And the right cue, and in our case, it's a vibration. So basically, it's like a metronome. And you can follow that metronome to help you walk. So basic, people question it. But sometimes the simple solutions are really quite good. But underneath that simple solution lies this huge amount of processing and data capture that's going on to get that performance. And for people with Parkinson's, the mantra is clear to them anyway. Exercise, exercise, exercise. So you could view this as a Fitbit for Parkinson's. That's what we used with the investors when we started. During COVID, we changed that to Peloton for Parkinson's. And then we've rolled back a little bit. But yeah, it's the data element that's the thing of interest, particularly when it comes to falls. So we want people to fall less. And so this is a quote that we found fairly recently. It's possible to learn more about neurological status of someone from their walk than any other single procedure. So this was explained to me by one of the academics we're working with, that you can, in a dark alley outside a pub or a nightclub, I'm sure we've all been there, where you're looking around for your friend and they're miles away, you can't see any facial or details, but you can spot them. And you can spot them because their walk is giving their away. Everyone has unique walks. And certain countries around the world are using this uniqueness of walks for various purposes, but we can use it to help other ways. Because when your walk changes, you can then spot that change and work out what's happening. We're collecting the data, each device plus a handheld controller. What we're doing is forming these digital endpoints, and digital endpoints is the sexy term for clinical endpoints that are collected in the home from, well, basically IoT devices. So in our case, it's quality of gait. Is your walking still good? But then we can use that data to help with fall risk assessment and prevention. And this is going to be of huge interest in the insurance market. It's going to be huge interest for academics and clinicians and pharma companies. You know, there's a huge impact that huge impact we can have in those markets. Even just doing things as simple as activity monitoring. Have you done your exercises? Are you still going for your daily walk? You know, Roche is giving you this new drug that's very expensive. Does it have any impact in the real world? This is all area we can go with the wireless data collected on our device, transferred to our base station, and where we get that off our base station to the cloud, where we can process it and present it back to people. So part of the reason I'm here is this is an entirely, it's a wireless product. Unfortunately, at the moment, we do have some wired connectors, purely cost basis at the moment. We want to get rid of those for various reasons, waterproofing and so on, and the rest, which is why we're actually looking at NFC power and data, which is maybe crazy, but it means we can have a sealed device, and the use case is you would plug this in at night and the data can trickle off it, so we don't need a high data rate, and it has a long time to charge. And then we do away with another wire, and we can seal electronics. Anyway, the next steps for us, we are working with NIHR, that's the body, the Department of Health, basically, who say we're meeting a clear unmet clinical need. This is interesting stuff. So they've given us a bunch of money to go off and work for the next 3 years, or 2.5 years, on a number of clinical trials to get this, firstly, the efficacy shown in a clinical setting, and then doing the next stage, which will be in-home, which is where this wireless challenge is really going to hit us on. How the hell do we get the data back securely, easily, without having some ridiculous, take your phone out, take a photo, the user's not going to be able to do that. So this is our challenge, is to solve this wirelessly in an IoT manner, which is as seamless and easy as possible for the end user. And the idea is we use all this data to get regulatory approval, and hopefully then get it in the NHS, whereby the reimbursement model means we can get this out to as many people as possible. However, that's going to take 3 years, and our investors don't have enough patience, and we don't have money to do it. So our next steps is to sell the most basic version of this product we possibly can. It's effectively a garage door opener. You push a button, something vibrates. We basically have switched everything off just to be able to sell this as a very basic queuing device. And the goal is then to get this via the FDA clearance for US sales, where the market's going to be bigger. I mean, we just sell this in Florida. That's the goal. Basically, we'll use UK as the petri dish, and we get it to Florida. And that's for Parkinson's. But you mentioned we can do other conditions. So wider dementias, this can help. Stroke, Huntington's. There's a range of places this could go. We can also do something clever on the post hip and knee surgery market, in that there's a feeling that surgeons are doing operations that may not be required. Not that they'd admit that. They'd say that the physio didn't do their job. So wouldn't it be great to replace that sort of mudslinging with actual data of here's how you work before your operation, here's your rehabilitation, here's how you've improved afterwards. Now that's already done, but it tends to be done in, you need to be part of a clinical study or a research organization for that to happen. It's not every day. We want to get that every day in the home. It's part of your standard clinical pathway. So that's one avenue we're going. The second is the smarter product. So again, I've said this is the simplest thing we can get out. We now need to start turning on the smart elements. And for that, we need data. For that, we need a not so smart version to be released, which allows us to collect the data remotely. So the more data we get in, the more study we can do. And the analogy I use here is Elon. You guys probably know more about this than me, but it works with investors. Bear with me. Elon released his car however many years ago, and that's just one big data collection process. He switched on cruise control, and then every time someone takes over the steering wheel, he's got the data, and he can look at those exception events. Why did someone take over that car at that point? And then you add the cameras in, then you add, he's gone through the gears of collecting the data, and effectively we're doing the same thing. This is your 1980s cruise control. You set it at a particular speed, it just goes. The next version we want to do is the adaptive cruise control, where match the speed in front. That's the next one. The version after that, I don't want to say full-on self-driving, but let's say it can change lanes. It recognizes when you're in the park or when you're just pottering around your house. And of course, the dream is to get rid of the controller, remove that interface. And that's the full-on self-driving where we want to get, where we can spot a change in someone's walk, which is there in the data, spot it fast enough and be able to provide the cue to get over that fall. So I hope this is the start of something quite big. 2.5 years, COVID hasn't been good. Hardware is hard. Hardware is even harder when supply chains are up the left and you have to redesign. Everyone's in the same boat. But so it's been, we're getting to the point at which this is going to start coming real. So watch this space. As I said, hopefully this is going to be marketed in a month or so to a closed group of early adopters, and then we'll go on wider release later this year. I have a set with me if anyone wants to try it. Come and give it a go. Similarly, if anyone knows anyone with Parkinson's who's in this sort of area, point them our way, because we do need test subjects effectively to give their product feedback and give it a go. Anyway, that's me. Thank you.
Like Kumi, can you tell us even more about wireless technologies?
Thank you, Lena. Fascinating talk. Thank you so much for that. Lots of interesting topics that I may pick up on as well. Interesting comment you made about whether there's any money to be made in hardware, and the Peloton example is a good one. So I'm Kumi Thiruchelvam. I'm a technology entrepreneur, originally an engineer, by a small stint in medicine actually, and then switched to electronic engineering. I operate around the Golden Triangle. I'm an executive at the moment in a voice biometrics company called My Voice, but I'm also a non-executive at several startups. I'm an angel investor, and I've just stepped down as vice chair of the board at Cambridge Wireless, actually, which is how I originally was associated with PIM and the cluster here. I didn't know what level to pitch this, so apologies if it's too low or too high, but we've got plenty of time for questions in terms of the time available. So let me level set a little bit in terms of wireless technologies and what are the noteworthy technologies and trends. I think we've been picked up by a couple of the speakers here. In particular, satellite on the right side is making a very strong renaissance at the moment. There are global chipset companies like Qualcomm and Apple now working on satellite-enabled devices, not just for emergency services, but for internet connectivity. So if you look at what Starlink are doing, they're wiring up rural connectivity with pretty good performance. I know several friends in Somerset, for example, that use Starlink for broadband connectivity, and it's pretty good. UK is deploying 5G at the moment. There's a lot of research in universities like University of Bristol in 6G. I know from friends in China right now that they're deploying 5G advanced. That's 10 gig down from the mast to your device. It's already being rolled out, so I'm sure Apple and we will follow in the UK with 5.5G advanced in 2024. And going back to the left, I spent 9 years at Broadcom, one of the world's leaders in Wi-Fi technology. And both Broadcom and Qualcomm at the moment are pushing Wi-Fi 6E for mesh Wi-Fi networking. At home, I've got a tri-band network at home, actually, being a technology geek, and using a third band purely for the wireless backhaul at home. And that solves some of the issues I think one of the speakers was talking about in terms of how congestion is working across the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz band on Wi-Fi. And then there are a number of low power wide area networks as well being used in a variety of IoT devices that I'll touch on during the course of this presentation. And of course, the UK is rolling out broadband, and it's actually fiber to the home is actually been a relative success story in the last 4 or 5 years. Actually, if you look at the rate of growth of adoption in terms of fiber broadband across businesses and residential over the last 3-4 years, it's actually now grown to be quite the adoption rate higher, on par with, say, France and UK, France and Germany. It's one of the few success stories not many people in the media talk about, but we've actually pushed in the UK broadband connectivity quite aggressively, I think. And so we've almost lots of areas are not having it, but a lot of areas are having, pretty fast download speeds and upload speeds. Right? We're living in the world of video conferencing, two-way video conferencing. Upload is now becoming almost as equally important working at home post-pandemic. I think these are some of the trends that are occurring. So that's the sort of various trends, if you like, at a relatively high level on wireless technologies, just to level set it a little bit. And then coming into, what I'll talk about a little bit here, which is applications in robotics, okay? There are a number of industrial revolutions that we've gone through over a number of generations. The first was mechanization. The second was, I think this cluster here is very well known for as well, is assembly line production, core engineering, productivity. Third was the advent of the personal computer, I would say, and digitization. I've just posed a question there. Is there a fourth or is there a fifth? Are we in the fifth already? Don't know. Maybe it'll come up later on. Just provoking some debate here. The fourth is very clearly, in my opinion, the industrial IoT, or what most people call Industry 4.0. And that's happening globally right now. It's driving essentially business transformation using digital transformation. All our processes and enterprises in whatever sector, whether you're in automotive, whether in healthcare, manufacturing, is being transformed by the availability of sensors and ubiquitous technologies, wireless technologies. The fifth, if I can pose, is probably what's happening with large language models. An area I'm pretty active in at the moment over the last couple of years is generative AI. You've probably seen a lot of public discourse in the wrong way, in my opinion, but there's a lot of discourse on this area at the moment with large language models and essentially centralizing a lot of what we're doing and using voice and conversing with the internet being captured for modeling and then issuing highly responsive responses in conversational AI. That's maybe we'll touch on it on the panel, but I think we're already there now. The speed of deployment on some of these large language models and how we're using it is phenomenal. It's astronomical. Driven at the moment by 3 companies, Baidu, Microsoft, and Google. So wireless technologies are, in essence, delivering compute capability at the edge. And we touched on it in a couple of areas. One is in health tech, and the level of compute that we're seeing with low latency and with fairly reliable connectivity is enabling, I would say, better user experience, data-based decision making, but also brings us the challenges related to privacy. And that is where governments around the world are struggling with, in my opinion, is adequate regulation, legislation moving at pace with technology. Constant discussion in my household is, why are governments 20 years behind the technology? And we're running behind, essentially, with legislation, because technology is just moving constantly. In fact, the pace of change in conversational AI is even exploding beyond 20 years. So the question then is, how are governments going to create enforceable legislation? And I'm working with parts of government on the UK semiconductor strategy, on the AI Council as well. And it's a challenge. It's a big challenge, and it will continue to do so. what we read in the media is, of course, £100 million there or 4 billion there. It pales into significance of the billions that have been spent in other parts of the world. So ABI Research is a firm that I use quite a lot, actually. They're doing some really interesting analysis on edge AI. So if you look at data center compute right now, companies like NVIDIA are ruling the Intel, NVIDIA, they're dominating the capability in our data centers. And big tech is essentially processing a lot of data. I think as we move towards some of the other more intelligent devices at the edge, if you look at the center block there, I think it's a way for either citizens or companies or governments actually to take a little bit of control back. And this is where I think privacy and decentralization can support if we have strong legislation to enforce some of these areas. And specifically on robotics, couple of areas I'll pick up on. So on the left, I think somebody spoke about Tesla. Elon Musk is actually producing Prime on the left. That's their robotics investment. At the heart is what whoever's been Tesla driving, been training various models. So they have an AI processor and AI architecture and software that has essentially come from 10 years of people driving the Model S, 3, X, and Y. It's a highly capable system. Use cases are still to prevail for Prime, but he's not short of money to invest. So whether it's to fly to Mars or put out Starlink satellites, there's a lot of investment going on. They've actually combined the teams on software, on the data modeling and the machine learning aspect between what they're doing in the vehicles and what they're doing with robotics, with Prime. I actually think that full autonomy in terms of devices that Tesla are building is going to come through Prime first, not the vehicle, because of what I talked earlier in terms of legislation. The full level 5 autonomy is going to be a tough area to challenge. As soon as there's an incident with the full level 5 autonomous driving, whether it's Google Drives or whether it's Tesla, there will be a move and a lobby movement to stop that activity. That's only one place on the planet in China that won't happen, but everywhere else it will happen and it will slow down progress. But essentially, I think robotics on the left side in terms of the use of ubiquity of wireless technologies, sensors. One of the areas we're pretty active in the AI world is computer vision, actually, and so computer vision is heavily used in these robotics on the left. Use cases, I think he's just building capability and then deciding on how it's going to be used and sold and retail pricing. So it's a glorified research project right now. On the right is less so. It's a company that's making assistive AI-led robotics in Norway, actually. This company is called 1X. I think they were called Horizon Robotics before. They recently rebranded 1X. The interesting part for me is that just raised $25 million on their Series B. Don't know whether anyone in the room knows who led the round. It was led by OpenAI, that makes GPT-4 and ChatGPT. So they led the round and created companies like Allianz Ventures, Catapult Ventures in the Nordics invest in this. So you can see a little bit where the trend and trajectory is going for some of these areas. Initially, they're looking at deploying these robots in like security applications, warehouse management, security, 24-hour security at various high installations to use fairly repetitive tasks. That's where those robots are going to be used. I think conversational AI with these kind of robots is still some time away. So I think the quality of the response and the reliability of the response needs to be there. My brother's a surgeon in Addenbrooke, so he's been using robo-assisted surgery for about 15 years. So that's another area where I think we will see in surgery to help and support assistive. We have a workforce problem in the UK within the clinicians and in the NHS. So I think that's an area where we can deal with the supply issues and challenges within the healthcare systems, not just in the UK, but around the world. And I think it's already been talked about, perhaps not today, but the likes of Ocado and Amazon, how they use robotics They use private networks. I think Ocado used a private 4G LTE network in their warehouse in Hatfield to create one of the world's. I mean, the challenge with companies like Ocado, for Ocado, is fresh produce and how you can deal with ordering and inventories. And I think they've created a world-class system. Amazon, I think it's well known. They use robotics to deal with fulfillment and inventory management. So I think industrial warehousing is a huge use case and will continue to be a use case for robotics as with healthcare. So I'll leave the talk there in terms of wireless technologies and robotics. This is just a couple of slides on my voice AI. I'm not going to dwell on it. It's not necessarily for this particular agenda, but what we're trying to do is enable a number of edge AI companies with our deep neural networks. The next wave of AI, these slides were written a couple of years ago, actually. I wrote them before ChatGPT and generative AI. And it's weird for me in a startup where everyone's talking about our industry, actually. It should be good. Investors are still a little bit scared, but we're actually trying to process AI compute at the edge to create breakthroughs and new architectures in terms of machine learning models. Those are some of the sectors that we will address. We are already addressing smart TV viewing for personalization. We're already addressing smart security at home. So you can come in to your home and say, I'm home. It knows your voice print is already there, enrolled on the smart security system. It'll unlock it. And we're doing all of this at the edge, so no cloud processing. So to put some context earlier about what I was saying about decentralization and privacy, unless we want to continue to feed big tech. And I think that's a challenge generally, in society now, to be honest with you. Our advantage, our technology advantage is using a very tiny deep neural network to extract features of your voice print it, enroll that voice print on the edge, and then we infer whether it's you or not. So those of you who watched Maverick last year, you would have seen Val Kilmer's voice being reconstructed. It wasn't us. It was a British company called Sonatic that recently got acquired by Spotify. And so they regenerated, because Val Kilmer's got throat cancer, he couldn't reproduce his voice. So they had AI, that voice for Val Kilmer talking to Tom Cruise in Maverick last year in that movie. So, and we're going to see that more and more of creative industries using generative AI. The question we pose, obviously, is what challenges that brings in terms of security. Those movie buffs around you'll see Harrison Ford de-aged in the upcoming Indiana Jones. So you'll see him in a very different looking young Indiana Jones coming up in a few weeks in the next Indiana Jones movie. So I'll finish there and then leave time for questions either now or later on during the panel. Thank you.
Starting part two. Ray's going to deliver a very interesting. So you're talking about your new project, right? Yeah, perfect. So fascinating new project on its way that I think a lot of you would want to be aware of and possibly even get engaged in. So Ray, fire away and tell us all about it. Sure. Excellent. Thank you.
I'm Ray Meadham, CEO of Multiview Media. We actually are a streaming company. We develop multi-angle streaming for sport. We're the only company that we get the data from all the camera angles. So unlike picture-in-picture and watch together, we can tell you how long you spent watching drum cam, guitar cam, Hamilton cam or whatever. So we came from that background. But while working on the technology in broadcast, it made us realize how important data is, how important latency is, and how important the connectivity is. We're working with Silverstone at the moment in terms of developing the next stage. And it's evident that the infrastructure wasn't strong enough to cope with all the demands. 170 cameras for Formula One. You know, they have to bring in a whole lot of extra facilities to be able to make that work. So we kind of are working through towards that. So I'll just move on a little bit. You don't need all of that. So one of the main things that triggered that is that the fans here have multiple problems. How many of you have been to a sporting event, take a picture, try and upload it, and 3 months after you get home, the picture's on your Instagram account or whatever? You know, technology is not our friend. When you get 150,000 people on site, it struggled. And so that needs to be addressed. And so we were working with Silverstone in terms of how 5G can be improved at the track, how the network can be improved, the reach can be improved. We're working with Cisco in terms of the Wi-Fi side of things and where they put Wi-Fi in all the stands. So again, that would improve the connectivity. Now, the Jumbotron in your hand is a technology where you can actually sit and switch between the camera angles while you're actually here. So you can watch the car go past, and then instead of the next 3 minutes where you're standing looking at the big screen or talking to your friends, you can actually follow the cars around the track, see what's going on in the pits. But also that added another benefit in terms of being able to order merchandise, order food, being able to reduce the queues. So again, a lot of the problems that people have here is that when they come to massive events, it slows down the fan engagement. Now, we came in from a broadcast point of view, and we work with the BBC. We're about to make the BBC iPlayer into multi-angle. We're working with Disney Plus about embedding the technology. The one thing about our technology is we can embed it in their workflow. Rather than them having to have a specialist system and you have to log out and create a new account, you can now log in through your Disney account, your Netflix account, and we can make any single angle platform multi-angle. So YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, we've made them all multi-angle. We just haven't told them that yet. But the technology allows us to be able to look at the fans' pain points. And again, you know, critical here is reception. You go to any sports stadium, you go to any major concert venue, the struggles to deal with it because they're set up for a certain level, but 150,000 people here for one weekend. The next weekend, you may only have 5,000 people. So Silverstone won't spend money in terms of building a massive infrastructure if it's only going to be used for one weekend of the year. So we're having to work in terms of the commercialization of that process. From broadcasters' point of view, we found out that latency is obviously critical. So we actually are working in terms of, we've tested the technology from LiveView, Grass Valley, all the cameras, NDI. We've completely tested the technology from end to end. So we now have all of the data and all the information from the broadcasters. As I say, we're working with the BBC, we're working with major broadcasters in the States, and we're working with the mobile providers in terms of how the technology can improve fan engagement, but also it opened up a whole big can of worms. So I stupidly said, well, we were sorting out the 5G situation, we would help Silverstone improve that and commercially support them. But it was like there was no money available from various sources in terms of doing that. A lot of the funding for 5G had already been spent or been committed. So we stupidly said, well, let's look at 6G. So now we are now building the largest 6G hub in Europe. It's going to be based here at Silverstone. It will allow Silverstone Park and Silverstone Circuit to be able to test across a whole multitude of stuff. So the important things that we really need to look at in terms of what's the benefits of the next stage of 6G. So again, we've worked with Nokia, Huawei, and companies that are already quite developed in this area. And we have all of the research and the development that they've done. And we're working with all the key partnerships. So we have the 5G providers, part of the conversation. We have a consortium of companies like Cognizant, Microsoft, who want to come here and actually test the technology for the next decade. So that's really where we're going, is looking at how the technology can improve the 5G. And we obviously have 5G Advanced coming here. The beauty about building it here is that you can then test it alongside 5G Advanced while we're waiting for 6G to be delivered. But that's the reason for basing it here, is that we understand that 6G isn't going to be here tomorrow. You know, it's not going to solve it for the Silverstone Grand Prix this year, but it's going to build an infrastructure that will put us at the forefront of technology. And the government has realized that by building it in one place, we've got major advanced engineering, we've got applications for space. The UK Space Agency involved with us in terms of their applications. So again, we're looking at the satellite technology as well as the local level. So again, you can see in terms of the benefits, in terms of what 5G and 6G will offer in terms of latency. Getting down to a microsecond of latency will make most broadcasters fall off their chair. But that technology exists in the future. We've already built cloud-based systems. As I say, AWS and Microsoft are partners of our project, and we already use them in terms of our streaming platform, but we're now bringing it over to IoT, advanced engineering, and all the other applications to make this commercially viable. So again, the whole idea is to provide Silverstone as a commercial real-world studies. At the moment, all the 6G universities, all they do is they get their funding, they write a nice paper, they publish it, and then they apply for 7G funding. They don't really think about what's the applications of the technology. They can give you all the numbers, but they're not interested in terms of, well, who's going to use it? We've just written a paper. So, and again, we're working with the universities, so I must apologise on their behalf if they watch this video, that I've derided their entire work. I haven't, but it's just that that's my understanding of how that system works. But secondly, is that people don't think about 6G will not be on your mobile phones. It will not be something on your mobile phone in the near future. We're still dealing with 5G. We're still testing 5G. We're still integrating 5G. That will take a long time. But 6G will become a commercial proposition. So we're trying to get ahead of the curve. In 10 years' time, 6G will be the IoT in the factories, will be the robotics that you were talking about, the AI systems. Okay, so we need to be, as a country, at the forefront of this rather than playing catch up. Unfortunately, I can't deal with the Chinese through the government. So although they've got the technology and it's available, we're not allowed to use it. So we're working with Ericsson and Nokia and the companies that are developing the whole systems now so that we're ready to build that infrastructure here at Silverstone. So again, you can see the amount of industries that would benefit from being here. So all of those will rely on 6G. One project I can talk about is that National Express coaches. They're looking to bring fans to the event here because it only relies on cars to get you here, or bikes. So National Express is saying, well, we can bring all of the fans to the 50,000 capacity music venue that's here now, or to these sports events, and we can bring electric buses. So that's great, but Silverstone doesn't have an EV charging point. So we're having to build an EV system for the buses to come and park so that people can come in on the bus to reduce the transport issue. But also, one of the ways that we can sell this is that if you get on a National Express bus, it can get all the information from your ticket while you arrive, so you don't have to queue. You can just get straight off the bus and go straight to where you need to be. If you want to order merchandise, it can be delivered to that part of the track. When you get back at the end of the event, you can pick up your merchandise when you're getting back on the bus. These technologies exist, but nobody's ever joined the dots. They all work in silos. So we've just kind of gone, look, this is, as a fan, I come here and I've experienced this. How can I make this better with the technological knowledge that we're building? So that's what we're doing in terms of how we do stuff. Security, again, somebody was mentioning about the way you walk and the security aspect. Technology will need to speed up, and 150,000 people don't want to stand and queue. We're British, we do queue. But we don't need to. I went to SoFi Stadium in America, and they've really built the infrastructure from the centre out. They thought about the fan first and then built it properly, rather than, oh, we'll build it and then we'll adapt it when the fans complain. So that's what we need to do in the UK, is look at this. We're working with Everton on the new stadium that they're building there. How can they improve the infrastructure to make it better for fan experience? Now, I shouldn't say that, I'm a Liverpool fan, so but there you go. You know, commercial is commercial. You know, it's everybody's money. So that's where we're working with. So again, we have a list of companies that are already working with us, are already putting this together. We already have secured multi-million-pound funding, and we're expanding that. The government, we're working with the Department of Science and Innovation. They've now realised that they could spend money. They've spent £20 million on research at universities. How can they spend more money to make this commercially viable for the country? So these conversations are happening. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to have the building here until next year. 6G isn't going to be available until beyond that. But if we don't start building it now, but Silverstone is a showcase for motorsport, for advanced engineering, for so much. You've got the Oxford and Cambridge Arc. You've got everything within a postcode around here. And we need to use that as our selling point to the rest of the world. So that's really why we're building this 6G hub, to be able to be at the centre of that. So that's what we're doing. Thank you very much. That's me. Drop mic out of here. Thank you very much.
Very good, Ray. Thank you very much. Excellent stuff. Can I invite all of our speakers to now take part in we're doing the panel, right? Yeah. So can I get all the speakers to join the panel? Do you want to lead the panel? Yeah.
No, we've got Nick, who's our SIG champion, who will be leading our panel.
Yeah, well, that's right. Okay.
I'm trying to get tickets. For Wembley.
Okay. Just needs to adjust the camera very slightly. There we go. Over to you, Nick.
Right, well, thank you very much, all speakers, for very interesting presentations. What I've got a number of questions, and some of them may sort of cover or mention things which you've already covered, but really, if you could take in turns to answer, maybe repeat yourself if need be, but I'm sure that it will benefit people. So the first question that I'd like to ask is, we have 5G in place, so what are the problems you see with the current situation, the system? Maybe Ray, would you start off with that?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem we have is that the RAN system is very much controlling which network you're on, how it's utilised, how commercially it can be available. Certainly here at the circuit, where you've got 3 different providers all competing for the same crowd. I think that's something where setting up private networks or setting up, overcoming some of those barriers. So for us, it's more about the operators actually working with the commercial clients.
Right. Can we?
Sure. Yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big topic. So full disclosure, I was at BT.
Oh, great.
Lived through BT Wireless and Surfing the Net and BT Cellnet, and then I was there when O2 was bought by Telefonica after being spun off. I personally think there are 2 main operators in the UK. I think we should have about 2 or 3, and that will drive network consolidation, and that will ultimately deliver a better experience. So the current problems in 5G are around network design and planning and topology, and we aren't able to use software-defined networks or network functions virtualization in the way that will deliver, say, a 5G experience for a weekend for 150,000 people. The truck roll is removed, and then you can move to another area. That software networks will enable you to reduce reliance on capacity and coverage. So that's one area, I think, in terms of topology and design. The other is the way that spectrum is deregulated and licensed, to be honest with you. I think companies like BT and others and Vodafone have a universal service obligation, so they'll have to put the same coverage in the Outer Hebrides as in the middle of London. So they don't take into account, if you like, usage and demand, how it changes and how data and voice. So nowadays you hardly make that voice call on a congested cell because they want to be data. So those kind of things are, I think.
You got any?
Yeah, I second what you said about too many supply carriers in the UK. I think 2 would be plenty, because I think on that, just what I touched on about ranges and that sort of thing, I think that the demand that we're going to have for 5G, getting that infrastructure in there, is going to be much more challenging, because you need so many more data points of service to provide that 5G network that you did for your standard sort of G7 and 2G. So I think the big effort's going to be on how to roll that infrastructure out and make sure that we get sufficient coverage across all parts of the UK.
Nothing is nicely. So looking at it from someone producing a consumer product, the idea was, this is a beef of mine, is the perfect, what we're doing is perfect for us sticking as an eSIM module in there, 4G, 5G, at a factory, we link it to our system. It's an end-to-end solution for us. We're perfect. What a great product that could be. And then you call Vodafone and you get an intro, a warm intro about Vodafone. We speak to some sales chap. It's like, yeah, this is great idea. And then they send us the pricing. And it's ludicrous, utterly ludicrous. In fact, he told me just go and get some gift gaff, Sims, just big names, do it that way. Because their computer system, and Vodafone, of course, have problems. They have no way of making this technology useful for companies such as, like us. Their pricing system is lagging the technology. The pricing system should be, here's an interesting technology, should be given away the ability. We'll work out the data pricing later on, but a gig a day should be, I don't know, 5p, 10p, I don't make up a number. Because they've got to induce people to use this technology. It's not easier for us to develop around that, go back to Wi-Fi, make it clunky for the user. So in a way, I think 5G's got such great potential. 4G's got great. 4G's pretty good. I mean, my mother in the middle of absolute blooming nowhere gets better 4G connection, faster. It's fantastic. 5G, we looked at using it. We spoke to a couple of people, and then they said, look, unless you're in Liverpool, here, and here, don't use it, which is a real shame. So I think we are a bit behind. The technology isn't quite there. The consumer experience will be there. It's a multifaceted problem. Maybe consolidation will help. But also, I think the companies just aren't there to. It's like they don't want their technology to be used, which is a typically British thing to do. We'll make something really, really good and then overcharge for it. And I'm hoping, I'm hoping this can be solved, because for particularly medicine and healthcare and all of that, we want remote collection of data. We want this. This is going to help our NHS. It's going to help the systems. We just need to work together to try and make this happen in a commercially viable way.
Great. On the point of cost for your future systems, have you got any comments about what?
Yeah, and I think going back to what you're saying about having too many people involved at 5G, that's one of the reasons of why we've got into 6G so early.
Right.
Is so that we can work with the ORAN alliances, the government, the standardisation, and so on, and look at the costing. Because if we don't get it right, we're going to have another 5G debacle at 6G. So we need to sort it out. And so that's really why we skipped a stage. We're helping sort 5G out locally here, but in the journey that we're on, it's easier to. That's an oil tanker that we might not be able to stop. But let's get on another boat and decide the journey for 6G. But yeah, that's really what the conversation is now, is having these commercial conversations and saying, look, there is a massive market in all of those different areas that wants to benefit, and 5G doesn't service that. It could do, and actually Vodafone is a company who've actually started to look at and realise that they need to roll things back. AWS did this, a long time ago when they looked at their cloud delivery. They realised that it was going to be too cost inclusive to a lot of people, and they realised if they lowered the cost, more people would use it. And Vodafone and the networks have had to do that. So I think we slowly change what happens, but it's having to use the users to affect change rather than the providers.
And how would you like to solve the cost issue?
I think you have to hit them on their spreadsheet. At the end of the day, you have to show them what they're missing out of. You were saying about £65 billion worth of cost for Americans if they have a fall. That's a huge number, and that's just in one strand of one part of medical. If you roll that across all of the medical, that's a massive number. And it's the same thing with broadcast. We're working with the broadcasters. So we were part of the coronation, and they were testing 5G down the Mall. And it was interesting to see the different responses from different organisations and who were playing nicely and who weren't playing nicely, and so they realised that there were a lot of people there and a lot of opportunity. And I think they've realised the opportunity is greater than the costs that they thought they needed to charge.
Kumi, or have you got any comments on the costs?
I mean, briefly, 5G standalone was used, I think, during the coronation weekend along the Mall. So backward compatibility and the need to provide 2G. I mean, some phones are 2G modem compatible with 5G. Actually, you can actually dispense. So when I was there, actually, during that weekend, people couldn't get uploads on 5G, 4G. So I actually switched my phone to 3G. And I got brilliant coverage. Everyone using 3G data, actually. So backward compatibility, again, it adds to the cost and the bill of materials on the terminal. And so, again, also for courses, really, I think there's ways of using 5G standalone for specific applications.
Now, this is quite a detailed question. So we'll start with Greg. Any challenges of using 4G or 5G for data backhaul? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as a broadcaster and streamer, we have to, latency and the amount of data that we're transferring just to provide you with 5 or 6 angles for a football match or 5 or 6 angles from a motorsport. So you do have to think about the entire chain. So, we use cameras that are NDI compatible now. which then means that everything is then straight from the camera to the cloud. So the production is now happening in the cloud. So it's about, we're reducing all the cable runs, etc., but we're now increasing the stress in some other areas of the workflow. And I think, you know, some of the camera operators that we work with in Multiview and Grass Valley, they have 4 and 5G running compliance at the same time. So you can switch backwards and forwards, as you found with having to go down to 3G, is that they can't afford for 5G to clog up. So they have to have all of these other, you know, it's kind of almost having a secondary backhaul in terms of being able to capture that.
Is that, sorry, particularly broadcast world, I think over COVID, you've seen people, basically news presenter with iPhone, doing a lot. It goes clunky because their phone's not as high priority as somebody else's phone, and the signal jumps out. You know, there's people are working round what they should be doing, which is having a proper 4G connected camera, because these things are cheap and everyone's got it in a pocket. But it's opened up such, rightly or wrongly, I mean, the quality's fine, but it's not broadcast quality. Well, it's broadcast quality. I don't know.
It's getting close.
Getting close. Yeah. But the opportunity is there for doing this completely wirelessly without having the cable. I mean, it's what a great time to have all this. And all I'm asking is 500 megabytes a day over 4G or 5G at acceptable cost. But that news presenter probably streamed a gig, probably for free, by their consumer package. They'll try and do this commercially, it's just not there. It's
cellular is still a contended service. So you are victim to other people using the channel. And radio, by its nature, can be affected by line of sight and other people, obstruction. So I don't think we're going to move the country's backhaul away from fiber, high speed. And BT 21CN is still there as the backhaul, 21st CN, full of, you know, it's high speed switching and fiber networks to carry the trillions of megabytes that we travel, you know. I think it's complementary.
I think that's where the commercialization comes in. Is somebody like, you know, Cognizant and Aston Martin, for instance. There's a factory there, they can put it in, they've got the money to spend on it, and it will be a private network and commercially viable. But you can't do that for yours because of the nature of the business. So the commercialization is different for different industries, different people. But if there's ways and means that we can get those to deal with what they're doing, it then takes a lot of the pressure away from the smaller SMEs and other companies that are trying to do what they're doing.
To sort of take this a step, question back and question forward, but the cost profile. So a lot of, well, may or may not be true, but you know, the cost of the modules has come down hugely. So it's practically no effort for us to choose the 5G module over what does everything. They've made it really cheap for us to incorporate it into our designs. Then you go try and use the designs. You have a problem. So one end of the electronics industry is saying use it, and the rest hasn't caught up, which is quite frustrating. But
I think that's true of most big corporations. Is that the R&D team have brought something, and then the finance team catch up later on, sales and marketing. It's not always a joined up thinking. Right, something like Apple actually think about the chain before they release the product, so they release it once and then don't have to kind of do too much behind the scenes, whereas other companies that we built it, let's get it in the market, but then we'll worry about the cost and everything else later on. So yeah, I think it's there's lots of issues and you can't solve them all. But I think that with what we're learning from 5G and the step from 4G to 5G, you know, companies are beginning to realise that commercially you have a choice, and sometimes people are starting to find ways around it or starting to find other loopholes or other options. And they've realised it's not been the cash cow they thought it was going to be. So, you know, that's where the user has the strength eventually. But it's just frustrating for all of us, you know, trying to solve the situations at the level at which we're working at when there's big corporations who could help us sort that out very quickly.
Talking now more generally, maybe each of you could just highlight what you think benefits are to the technology of 3G in the future. Ray, can you start off?
Sorry, 3G.
Sorry.
Well, maybe it might be, but we might go that way around. You know. Yeah.
More generally.
I think it's the key ones are the latency,
Yeah.
massive. The data coverage, data transfer rates are going to be massive. So for big commercial users where they have a lot of data, they need to transfer very quickly.
Yeah.
That's going to be the situation. It's not going to benefit you or I on our mobile phone to some extent because it's just not going to be at the sort of level that's necessary. But yeah, the latency in the data is going to be the massive thing.
Yeah, I mean, 2G, 3G came from a technology called code division multiple access, CDMA. 3G delivered wideband CDMA. Okay, so it's really a cellular radio network designed for voice. 4G was the first orthogonal frequency division multiplex coded network, which is OFDM. And that was designed to bottom up the data and voice. And it's supposed to address throughput, latency issues. 5G delivered it perhaps in an enhanced way. It's not a revolution, it's like an evolution from 4G. Personally, I'm not convinced of 6G other than it's another G. I think that at the end of the day, you know, governments around the world will license spectrum radio. If you look at some of our military applications, they're using private mobile radio for secure comms in a private fashion, whether it's 3G, 4G, or 5G respective, because PMR private mobile radio is used for secure communications. So I think that, like you correctly said, I think a lot of universities are pushing 6G in terms of advanced research. As I mentioned, I think Bristol 5G was pushed extensively by Surrey as well, the 5G Innovation Centre at Guildford, put together by Vodafone, Huawei, and Surrey, University of Surrey. So I'm not convinced of the consumer reasons for 6G yet, because I think, frankly, 3G or even machine to machine can act properly with 2G, because it depends on what your actual data demands are and your voice application demands are of particular technology.
Yeah, I don't see personally, myself or partner designing 6G into any products anytime soon. I think it is very much going to be a commercial technology, but I think, as well, we are finding ourselves working around the problems with 5G as well. So you will also find a lot of people working who want to do probably something very similar to what you want to do, go in for the 2G and the 3G bands to get around that. But I think, 6G, if I can take some of the commercial load off of the 4G, 5G networks, that'll obviously benefit us as sort of normal consumers as well. Interesting to see how that goes.
I'm thinking it all comes back to, particularly on the consumer levels, how much data can you possibly consume in a 24-hour period? We can probably work that out. So the advantage of 6G, latency, brilliant, that'd be fantastic. But really, is any human's going to notice anything between 10 milliseconds and 1? No. Your algorithm, 6G might enable, I don't know, some bankers to have a slightly faster network connection for the matching somewhere, so they can do their high frequency trading. But yeah, you're right, I think it's a consumer, non-consumer play. Well, I'd be interested to know, again, it can't be more than 20 years ago, where I think it was the Isle Man was used as a 3G, and there was a photo in New Zealand somewhere that of a transit van with a 3G receiver in the back of it. Well, what are we talking with 6G? What size is it? Are we still talking it's wheeled around in a transit van, or is it?
No, it's compatible with the 5G mast and the system that's already in place. But obviously, again, because the commercial realization is driven by who the customers are going to be. So in terms of somebody like Aston Martin across the road there, their data on a daily basis is more than, most cities.
Well,
because of the transport of the cars, the advanced engineering, the data coverage, the stuff that they're sending backwards and forwards is astronomical. So they're a commercial client who would need that, and they can afford to pay for the infrastructure for that to be in place. The cost of your router at home is preclusive to it's only covering your house, and you're only streaming, Netflix or whatever, and there's a limited amount of usage. But what they do over there is huge, and that's really why, and autonomous vehicles, for instance, is a prime example, is that the necessity to have accurate connectivity to autonomous vehicles for the next decade you know, that needs to be a citywide infrastructure. That's going to be costed by the councils and the government rather than you and me on our bus ticket.
There's I'm not talking of autonomous vehicles and stuff. Does this help with geolocation?
Yeah.
So you can go sub whatever centimeter RTK. Yeah.
I mean, the testing in terms of the range and the delivery is what's happening at the universities. What has already been tested in China, and you know, Nokia and so on have already got some data on that process. And now it's applying that in the real world, which is kind of where we come in.
I'm assuming that Aston Martin and other Formula One teams on race day are using non-congested networks and private networks. You don't want people uploading to Instagram and blocking. Or maybe that's why it's not doing that well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues with the circuit here is that you have, you know, a server for the fans and a server for the teams. The broadcasters bring in their own system because they can't afford to rely on everywhere in the circuits. You know, I was at Miami for the Grand Prix and Verizon were providing two separate systems side by side, but one was quite capable of coping with just the fans at the circuit and the rest isn't. When they built SoFi, they built two separate systems in the building when they constructed it. So it's about building the infrastructure for the future rather than waiting till we have what happened at Silverstone last year, is that people logged in and couldn't get network coverage and they complained. And Formula One, if that happens again this year, will start to consider whether Silverstone is right for having Grand Prix.
It is commercial relationship. I mean, I've attended several events at Wembley, and what EE have done there with their corporate sponsorship is pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
With 5G, not 6G, in terms of having access to the network when you want it.
Yep.
Right, and that's with the corporate sponsor Wembley, and they've got specific infrastructure in place there.
And I won't tell a real story because I'm recording this, but it goes beyond the stadium. I used to live in Fulham Palace Road in London, so we had Craven College about 100 metres one direction, and obviously Stamford Bridge. Just any match night, our phones just stopped working. It was so frustrating, particularly when I was meant to meet someone and they told me from the bus stop outside, and she got very angry, very, very angry, because why is he not responding? Why is he not? And you know, that cost me quite a lot of money that evening because the congestion affected not just the fan, but the entire region.
Yeah.
It really pissed us off. So 60 solves that? No.
I'm not sure about the relationship. It's a whole dating app. We might be able to build on the back of that. But I don't think so. No.
On 5G and 6G, are there regulatory issues in the development, or what is the situation on regulatory? Maybe Kumi.
Well, one of the challenges with bill of materials on 4G devices was band fragmentation. So I think we had 41 different bands in it. So the patent pool and how IP and litigation work in terms of what is inside the device and how much it costs matters in terms of how many bands you have. 5G was even more fragmented. I think 6G, they're looking at refarming spectrum that was licensed for 2G and 3G. So there's a whole regulatory environment that needs to consider. It's under Ofcom, and they're looking at how you refarm spectrum that was used, for 3G. I mean, 4G launched very quickly in the UK because certain people convinced the government to refarm 1800 megahertz as 4G now. We essentially launched 4G in the UK quicker than most other European cities on the back of it. And there's similar dynamics going in terms of lobbying. Happens in Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum as well. The upper 6 gigahertz band has just been regulated for Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7. So for me, I smile when people talk about 5G and 6G because we're on to 7th generation Wi-Fi right now, which is prevalent in devices. And we actually use more data on our devices on unlicensed Wi-Fi spectrum than licensed spectrum. If you look at the amount of data consumers use on their tablets, their laptops, and phones, we actually use more data on Wi-Fi than cellular.
Any other comments?
I think from a sort of certification point of view on a product then as well, I can't speak for 6G. I've never seen a product with that in, but certainly,
cellular devices are definitely one of the most expensive to put through certification, and 5G definitely didn't help that. And I say, but the number of bands available on 4G, 5G versus 3G and 2G massively increasingly. It's the sheer amount of testing that these devices have to go through. So,
what was, I'm just trying to remember like specific absorption rates and things like that. Is there, these things need a clearance region around them for the commercial 6G, and would you be able to stick your head between transmitter and receiver?
5G was going to kill us, or some campaign, right?
Presumably these are getting higher and higher power devices, and you're holding them closer and closer and closer to parts of your body.
That's what we're saying is that the consumer usage is going to be different than the commercial usage. So,
but there's no restriction in commercial usage. You can't put this in a factory, a closed cathode factory, which is basically one big metallic object with the signal bouncing around, and have your workers there, and then 6 years time, tumors start happening.
I mean that's obviously part of the regulatory testing that's going on, and I think that's very key. And unfortunately, because certain countries have developed it sooner than others, that data isn't always available or isn't clearly published yet. So I think there's still a long journey to go. I think for us, we can get NDI from a camera to the cloud on 5G brilliantly, but I get a better reception to the fans watching it on a Wi-Fi sat in the stands. So to some extent, 5G solves one part of the journey, but it doesn't solve the entire flow. And I think that's kind of where 6G is going to be. It's going to solve certain parts of the connectivity problem, but it's not going to deal at all ends of the process. So it's not a fix-all, it's not a solve-all. But I think it just gives certain commercial clients the ability to be able to improve what they do because the amount of data that they utilise. But you and I, from a personal point of view on our mobile phones, won't see any difference at all because it's not something that's going to be on your mobile phone, at least for the next decade.
And as long as there's a consolidation in the smartphone, we're in a duopoly with Samsung and Apple, they will drive their roadmap to global dynamics. Yeah. And a country of 70 million people will follow, right? So when China Mobile rolls out 6G or 5.5G, Samsung and Apple will move their roadmaps, and then the UK operators will move because they want to sell those devices to maintain share, to maintain customers, as happened with Apple when they launched their first iPhone, actually in 2005. It was an edge device. Oak at the time were going to go from 2.5G to 3G. They had to hold and spend 50 million on rolling out edge network for that phone. And so those dynamics will still continue.
Now, I'll open up the questions to the audience here. Have you got any people who's got a question there?
I mean, it seems to me that because I've been into other presentations before about FPGAs and all that sort of stuff, and clearly the potential is absolutely massive. But would you say that the one critical point is the reliability of it? Because especially with autonomous cars and all that sort of stuff, we're talking about, and even your devices, Tristan, because if people are relying on that for their health and their safety and all that sort of stuff, you can't have signal disruption. You can't have anything fail. So is the most critical aspect of the whole thing, not the stability of the network, and how would you guarantee that? Because we've all experienced that it's not always there.
But the huge issue when we're running on product requirements and get to the regulatory stage, how you guarantee left leg tops or right leg. Anyone with headphones knows that the brain is a big body of water which blocks signals. So if your wireless headphones out in a field, correct, don't work as well if they can't bounce the signal around the walls to get from one side of your big block of water to the other. And we noticed this in our testing where we had we used one of those the water cooler things. And we put on either side. So it's just we needed a way of absorbing. And yeah, we can induce it not working. And that is disastrous for the consumer. They assume that when something's wireless and it talks to, they should always talk to, but they don't understand the physics of beam steering and but they have the expectation, and if anything doesn't meet that expectation, it's broken, it's rubbish. but they don't not understand the huge amount of physics that's going on to make that work.
Well, quality of service, I think, is a big issue, all right, generally, and it's usually found in the small print. When you buy a product. Most people don't read it, it's in the small print. But in telecoms networks, we've often talked for decades about 5 nines availability, i.e. it's not 100%. We've always talked about 99.999%. Whenever it fails, it's always so that hasn't changed for decades. Telecom networks, whether fixed or wireless, have talked about 5 9 availability.
Yeah, but if that causes your autonomous car to crash into something, then you're not getting a lot of comfort for that. Imagine.
But equally in the broadcast world, I used to work in an office that had a wireless link from one office to another. It kept going down. This was IT guys on a case time. Look, the pigeons were sat on the solution with a few spikes.
Yeah.
Something always broke it. You could design it, but there was always something that was so. But the 100% uptime, the customer might not be technically astute enough to realize that 100% uptime never beats 100% uptime.
And have to go on a train to spot that. Trains can't offer you total coverage all the time. There's so many variables that the train can't cope with. So, and I think that's kind of a lot of people on the trains don't understand the science. So they just, I want to watch my thing on my phone. Why can I not watch it all the way for the whole journey? There's too many people on the train, or we're going through a tunnel, or whatever it might be. These things affect the everyday service that people get, but we're not solving those problems. And that's really where we're having to look at. There are so many industries that use the same technology, but the people who provide the technology are not caring whether they solve it or not. They're just selling it. And so it's not going to get any better unless we start to put pressure on those corporations and those companies. And that's really where there is a reset point for certain things. Sport has been changing the way certain things are delivered in the broadcast world. Medicine is changing in terms of the pandemic changed the way a lot of things had to be delivered. So I think there are some of the, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a world crisis to actually start again and think we need to sort these things out. And that's maybe where some of these changes and challenges are happening.
Because that is what is stopping from a lot of these things from happening.
Yeah.
Like autonomous cars. And I went to a presentation where they were talking about, emergency roadside surgery, where, a doctor in the hospital could actually perform all the actions and then be transferred through the network to a robot who would for the surgery. But it's kind of like, but the 0.0001 that's going to fall out is going to kill that person. So that's kind of like the critical issue, isn't it? And it's I mean, is it possible to resolve that? Because I mean, you've all kind of said varieties of 100% coverage is never going to happen. So are some of these technologies just a fantasy that isn't actually realistic to ever achieve?
Yeah, I don't think we can solve all the problems with just one technology.
Sure.
And I think we have to be careful what technology we use to solve that problem. I still wouldn't want a robot doing an operation on me, but I understand that there aren't enough doctors to perform all the operations. But there may be some operations that can be performed by a robot, rather than, a doctor can then be dealing with a critical incident where they need to be hands-on.
And then would it be things like, if the robot, in very simple terms, if that uses 3G, and there's no commercial, there's no consumer interruption there because they're all on 4G and then 5G is used for something else. That's possibly how we could.
Yeah, Porsche factory uses a low-level, network to be able to build the cars with the robots, but it has a higher level in terms of the data usage, in terms of certain specifics in that manufacture.
Yeah.
So that's where they've built specific elements within the chain that just cope with. They need a degree of accuracy. A bloke just fitting a tyre on the car or just sticking a bit on the side, that's a slightly easier operation. That's, was a human job that's now robotic.
Yeah.
But something that's very meticulous, then you do need a high data rate and a high level of accuracy and a high connectivity.
Yeah.
Because if that goes wrong, that car comes out of the factory and could kill somebody.
Yeah.
And of course, well, it was actually on the radio on the way here, some story about, I think they use the term data poverty, as in people not having.
Yeah.
Do we think that we will expect data to be like electricity? that it'll be a right. Every home should have a data connection, every home should have a power connection, every home should have a water connection. Do we think that's going to be the future? And then it'll just be expected that we have a certain level of coverage wherever we are, even if it's in the hydro Hebrides, and it's very clunky and low latency by satellite. But you have to have it to be expected.
So these houses are being advertised with the broadband connectivity in their marketing literature. So in terms of high speed, it's being used as a marketing tool, as well solar installations being used as a marketing tool.
It's actually utility. It's
Yeah.
utility. I would like to ask, I'm just curious about talking about the different levels of capability on different standards, 2G, 3G, 4G, but are we about to turn off 3G? Yeah. 3G is about to go, isn't it? It's going to, they talked about turning 3G off sooner than 2G because 2G is still required, maybe even smart meter communications perhaps. So, but 3G is going to go, isn't it?
They are eventually going to refarm the spectrum. So
Right,
the
okay.
resource is finite, right? So
Okay.
radio is spectrum is finite. It's not infinite. So they will probably
So just rebrand, so maybe 4G might take some of the spectrum as 3G. But
Yeah, they'll refarm it, so they'll use the same band.
on terms of where.
I don't know when, but yeah, that's what they do.
That's why Vodafone are advertising now that they're closing it. You know, they've already said that 3G is being taken out of the spectrum. So they're already preempting the fact that Spain users are coming somewhere down the line. There's only so many spaces that you can have available. So I think, you know, when those kind of companies are realizing that there is something down the line, they had to get ahead of that curve. Otherwise, you as a customer will get on your train and your 4G suddenly goes down to 3G when you go near Lake Buzzard or something. People would then get very confused that, oh, I've lost the signal altogether. At least we still can hang on to a bit of 3G for some part of the journey.
That's going to be happening more often.
Yeah.
My phone keeps going down 3G.
Congestion. Generally, the train lines in the UK are around where not spots are.
Yeah.
No, there's a coincidence or not. Yeah, they usually where not spots are. Yeah.
Last year, I'm pretty sure this is a true story, but it might be not. Previous CEO of Vodafone to come in from so the same Pancras, and we hated the fact that this phone stopped working, which is why the people of Vodafone got perfect signal all the way in even in the tunnels because they have a transmitter in each end. Because we wanted it to work, unless you got the money to do it. I was going to ask about the rate of which all this wireless comms is being developed and then commercialized, I think is too fast compared to the speed of the adopters, the traditional adopters. And I think it was like farming, where you want, a remote travel watering level meter, I don't know, which they've only probably just bought, only just probably installed, and it probably is 3G because the company that provides it only pays for 3G. That's going to get switched off. People are going to get very angry about this because they've only just invested in that infrastructure to do that really cool thing that some people have known about for the last 15 years. How do we speed up the adoption of this? It comes back to cost. And it's only the cost has only just come down that it's I'm speaking to someone who's just bought a robotic lawnmower, which doesn't have 4G connectivity, which is crazy. There's a slot for a SIM card, but nothing on the inside. So yeah, I think we're back to the idea of cost is the 3G and that cheaper stuff is it's only viable now and it's only being probably widespread use, and then they're going to pull the rug out and people are going to get annoyed and then not want to use the next version because we're only change it in a couple of years now. People are why bother? So you're limiting the market, so of course it gets difficult.
I think that's where there's not the joined up thinking. If somebody's made a decision that's right for their part of the connector of the circuit, but they don't think of the implications, it's just that, and I think that's true of everything. It's not just wireless. The rules and regulations can change and they don't always think of the full implications. But somebody's made a great decision somewhere and it's got them to where they need to get to, but they don't really care on the implications further down the chain. And I think there is now a lot more organisations starting to realise that they have to communicate, they have to share information. And one of the reasons why we said about putting the 6G hub here is the fact that it gives us a central point for everything to come to, rather than it be so disparate across the country and nobody's actually gathering the information or providing the information or the setup so that we get it right for the next stage. And I think we can't go backwards. I can't change 3G and 4G, I can help improve 5G, what we're doing with the networks and the companies that we're working with, and then 6G will obviously be a layer for a specific about people. A bit like, not everybody has a Bentley and a Rolls Royce, but Bentley and Rolls Royce still build cars because of the demand for that level of vehicle. But sometimes even in Formula One, what they create in Formula One car will slowly be in your car 10 years down the line. So there is a knock-on effect for somebody to see.
But are we not going to get the pleasure with 5.5G you can help?
Yeah, we will do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
we've been intermediary step.
Yeah, 5G Advanced is already slated to be rolled out in the next, 2 to 3 years. The infrastructure is already there, the tests have been done, everything's allocated. But I think that's already, we have to go down that road because that's where America's gone. And there is a need, there's a need to fill a gap at that level. But yeah, 6G is not going to be till 2030, at least. So there has to be something to fill that. And there was always a plan to add 5G Advanced in the workflow. It's just been delayed by a pandemic and various other things that kind of create problems along the way. But yes, it's always been there.
Firstly, thanks to Kumi for the live pack today. I never knew that if I was in a congested area, I could feel It's 3G next time at a festival, I can feel very smug. That's what that message might get.
That's what some of the people standing next to me said. Oh, wow,
Yeah.
cool. I'm going to remember that.
Next all day, I've definitely taken that away. My question is about the barriers to the rollout of 5 and 6G, potentially. Some will call them tinfoil wearing hat. Are there any kind of scientific elements that might talk about the electromagnetic frequencies that might impact more so on 5 or 6G masks that could impact the rollout?
Yeah, there's a massive environmental ability and sustainability to any of this technology, and I think people are more aware of it. But also, I think people are now asking more questions and putting more pressure on either disinformation or dispelling those myths, and trying to kind of go on an offensive rather than a defensive. But I think, yes, I think 6G testing has learned from 5G issues, and so it will address a lot of those in terms of the next stage of rollout to make sure that we don't kind of feed that kind of disinformation that can lead to what people feel 5G offers.
I think just to touch on this briefly, where the level of frequency could potentially be much more dangerous if you're in an enclosed building as opposed to the masks that are in wide, open, expansive space. Is that, from a moving perspective, not really understanding this as much, is that the case with small space versus large space?
Fragmented airways, there's always that potential. And people were talking about microwaves 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. I think the thing with medical and health issues is it may not show itself up in the population for several decades later. There's a timing issue between rolling out technology, scaremongering, and actually what the state of the world will be in 20 or 30 years. Right? We'll never forecast a pandemic in the way when 5G was being rolled out. I think the other thing I'd say is that the equipment manufacturers or the base stations or the radio access providers now, and the operators are paying a lot more attention to sustainability and power consumption, and therefore the use of power in terms of being green and actually drawing less watts in the operation of a 5G or 6G. That is a positive. I think the newer technologies are far more green that way. And I think that's an area that we didn't have perhaps in 2G or the power. A lot more focus on it.
I think you have to look at cars in terms of, we had diesel and petrol cars, and then suddenly we found out about all of the issues that they created. And it's taken a long time to change it because the people in control of cars and our desire to have cars meant that we didn't want to move to anything other than. So now we've got hybrid because we can't quite get to fully electric. So we've had to find certain scenarios that have dealt with stuff. And to the point about the sustainability, 6G testing is showing a 32% reduction in actual, power usage. I mean, that's a substantial saving on a carbon footprint that can be offset somewhere else. But, we've got to make sure that it doesn't have the human impact. And I think, we will drive around in cars and we still pollute the world in terms of what we drive. So we're still quite happy to do it in that category, but we're worried that our microwave might kill us or our 5G phone might grab balls out the top of our head. So we just have to be careful in terms of how we say things and do things. But yes, certainly the development of 5G and 6G networking has had to meet very strict, technical requirements.
And we won't know that this is a bit like Apple recently had to say something with the interaction between a phone and a pacemaker. Not about the issues legal. And of course they deemed that completely safe and went through all the testing. And just like with my history of wireless power, the test doesn't measure the thing that you think is, the test is 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I wrote the IEEE testing, not this technology existed.
Yeah.
When the regulation catches up with what people are doing, they're going to go, oh, we're going to write it right, so it doesn't fail. But you don't know, and I think this is why the caution, I'm just send our stuff through the EMC and the labs, throwing huge amount of energy at a tiny little object to see, oh yeah, but that bit gets hot, or that bit gets corrupted, and the testing there. But it's only the testing that we know and the conditions that we know, and you can't test for all possible. So I think there's right to be a bit of caution, but equally, so the things we'll have brigade, physics also needs to come into play. But let's not be. But then, as I've explained to me yesterday, you're explaining you're losing. You have to explain this following off the argument. So front loading it and explaining, doing it, like managing the comms of this, and probably they are not getting this adopted.
Aaron.
Yeah, it's an extension of what we're discussing right now. I live near Santa Cruz in Silicon Valley Bay Area, very, very liberal community. They even had to shut down, they had a huge protest to shut down smart meters, right? Because they said, even though the meter is sitting outside, it's sending some radio signal, it could be harmful. But I've been in technology all along, and a couple of people I play pickleball with, Kumi knows this game. And this person, he's Italian, 75 years old. He said, you're wearing an Apple Watch, you're wearing a smart ring, and you're having a cell phone, and you worry that there are radio signals around you, but there's definitely truth in there, maybe not 0.001% failure, that's probably 3, 4, 5% of an issue. In the society, we always look at 80-20 rule, right? It's going to benefit 80% of the people, let's do it. But I think the concern I have, even though I've been in technology, is it's not just 3G, 4G, 5G by itself. I think the first presentation touched on it. There is body area network that's beginning to happen, wearables and wearables on you. You have your cellular phone, which is probably the most powerful transmitter. To your point, the transmit power changes from one technology to the other. There's multitude of stuff happening. Each is tested in its own domain separately. But I'm carrying a 5G, I'm carrying a watch that has Wi-Fi, and some Apple Watches have cellular and mine doesn't. And there is a new technology completely, which we didn't touch on here. At some point it's going to hit, which is wireless charging. Wireless long-range charging. It uses kind of Wi-Fi-like signal to charge your phone without even having to place it on a charger. So when you have this 8, 9, 10 things, which no individual has single control over, you're walking into a conference room, there are 10 transmitters blasting, and to Kumi's point, might have zero effect or maybe negligible effect over 1 week, 1 month. But for the generation that's coming up, brains that are developing, there is a downside, I'm sure that is there. Everybody would say that is a downside. How big is it? How quantifiable it is? That's an unknown. It's not a question. It's a concern or a statement, I think, which collectively somebody has to answer, and it has to be the West. It's not going to be the East West, which we always been talking about, because the technology will happen. Or even
some of the big, to that point, some of the big giants have got huge research budgets, right? So Facebook has for several years, Meta now has for several years been working on a brain interface. They quite often talk about it at their events. At some point, they'll commercialize it, either through their Quest family reality labs, which is all about the metaverse and mixed reality, or they will commercialize it at some point. But they've spent millions so far on a brain interface to a wearable. And whether that's mixed reality, as I say, or they're doubling down right now on the metaverse, it may come in our lifetimes, right? So that's one area. Semiconductor giants like Qualcomm have been working on nanotechnology for a while for implantable silicon with sensors for medical applications. Actually, if you think about always-on data for monitoring our health and well-being, and so these are some of the big tech research agendas that we ought to pay attention to, and perhaps think about how our governance models should regulate that. Because they are operating in free market economics world.
I'd be more concerned about where the, if it's in the body or where the charging point is.
It might go for decades without charge, you know. Who knows?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Tristan.
Yeah, please do.
As a, I guess, an entrepreneur developing a startup, smart tech, how we've all been aware that in the last 2 to 3 years, the electronic supply chain has been a major issue to everything around us. As that OEM developing product that has active devices and silicon, how are you adopting or are you taking on board challenges that you'll face as you adopt your wearable, and how is that going to affect the silicon providers that are producing those chips today when they can't even keep up with today's demand with the adoption of some of those new technologies coming through? I just see you shaking your head and going, oh my God, I've got
Stressing you out now.
just to achieve this roadmap. I don't know how to put it on or achieve it.
To answer that question too, we started off this naively throwing the kitchen sink at our design because we, back in 20 years, it wasn't 2020. Yeah, pre-COVID, the before times, but you go on a Meister or Farnell or whatever and just
Chips, they're available.
yeah, 500, 5,000, yeah, just buy it, whatever. We threw the kitchen sink at it because we didn't know the solution to our problem, but we just thought let's back ourselves and put everything in there. That's obviously changed. We've redesigned just like everyone else probably has had to do. Those quirky little chips for one particular user who then they're available on Meister, and if it fits your problem, yeah, buy that. Fantastic. It does exactly what we need. That's basically gone. I think it's it might actually be good because it means you don't design with some random component that's going to disappear in 3 years when the apples don't need it anymore, or the batch that they made for Apple that Apple only took half of has gone. So there may be a consolidation or rationalization of the component world to the core bits that actually do what they need to do. So fewer capacitors, of higher quality potentially. Stop using silly values that no one else uses. Let's just stick with the core values of various components. Let's stick to tried and trusted modules in the RF world. The Nordic guys are making things that are just brilliant. Let's just use the Nordic stuff. So we've probably gone from being naive, thinking let's design this all ourselves, to let's just use what's available. And our current design process is literally our head engineering bridge. You'll have DigiKey Meister up in one window, and you'll have KiCad or whatever we're using in the other. And only if the component is available and in a cart will he place that component on our design. Because there's literally no point us doing it, because when it gets to the manufacturer, not available. The direct impact on us as a business is we have to pre-buy everything. We are in a queue with NRF, with Nordic, to buy the next batch, and that takes 9 months, and we're in the queue. We might get faster if Apple or one of the big guys changes and uses a different. When suddenly the components are available, and we'll go to the front of the queue. But we are, we are in, and that is multiple queues for multiple components. I'm used exactly the same. So in automotive, if one of the car manufacturers needs more out of the queue, we're not going to get them. They're going to get them. So we are really struggling to do this. Now that probably means lots of cool tech isn't going to reach the level of development, TRL levels, that it could be until you're subsumed into a bigger organization. So we might see some market redigging maybe. Because there are great ideas, but you can only produce small sample quantities. So it's been really tough. I'm glad to say we are coming out of it, and we do have enough because we pre-bought literally a year ago components for our stuff that we physically had in our office that we can physically carry to the, and we're watching those because they're probably more valuable in the end. Or we can get loads of money for these on eBay. Well, or whatever on sale you can find. But yeah, it's really tough. And I don't think it's easing up a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be back to the level that you guys probably know more than we do.
Yeah, I second everything you've sort of said there. Is that as a company, we've been redesigning products. I think the majority of work we did across 2020, 2021 was actually redesigning products we had previously designed for various clients, and it all just came about because certain niche modules that we used that did exactly what we wanted at the time were absolutely perfect. suddenly disappeared because Apple decided they want them, Ford decided they want them, that sort of thing. And that's what we've seen. So we've had to change in the last 3 years. We've changed all of our design processes in terms of how we go about designing stuff. So now we're getting manufacturers of boards involved as early as we can, getting proposed bill of materials across to them at the earliest possible, possible opportunity, so they can sit and say, you're not going to get that part, take it out, basically. And we've also had to start working with application engineers directly with your semiconductors, who can give us a visibility of actually, can we ever see this part, or are we going to be completely cut off by the giants in America, for example? I mean,
there's time you were looking at, which would be brilliant, and it was a part number. It exists, but it's never going to be made because it'll be superseded by whichever one Tesla wants. So it's really difficult to design. And then you've got a situation whereby cost scale economics doesn't really exist. Well, I'm having to tell our investors, they have all got in their heads that when you scale this up, you will get a 50%. No, we're just going to have a bigger problem because the parts don't exist. You can't cost out a part that isn't going to be built, or the time value of money's gone there. And I think we're replacing one set of problems with another. I think, but let's be positive. I think there is going to be something good because presumably we'll have better design processes. We'll have more standardized parts, which presumably will be higher quality, more reliable. Maybe even production techniques. We'll just step. This is the way you do it. This is the way you do that, and potentially that'll benefit all consumers from better, higher quality products.
Yeah, I think one of the, just on the point you made about the new technologies and that development, what I have been seeing and what a lot of application engineers have been saying to me is actually semiconductor manufacturers are almost prioritizing their new developments. So if I use SD micro, for example, a lot of their older families of microcontrollers, you can't buy those now. And they're prioritizing their new lines, and you can actually get those in reasonable time frames. So I don't think necessarily the whole chip shortage is necessarily going to slow down development of semiconductors too much on the new end, but certainly the guys who've already got products in the market are going to find continuing to make those is going to get more challenging as manufacturers don't have to pay lines to feed their new lines.
The likes of TSMC in Taiwan, they haven't got enough capacity to make in-that chips that's needed to support, IoT, consumer electric vehicles, your smart TVs, because they're focusing on the new chip technologies when everybody else is designed in the older chip technologies. So, and then to change to new chip technologies, there's a whole redesign of that OEMs just don't want to embark on because of the cost is high.
And then you overlay geopolitical risk. There was something read this morning, Taiwan, China. I mean, if that happens, we're like, what are we doing? Because the investment world that I've seen, particularly in London, they don't like hardware. Hardware's hard, costs too much. We just do everything in software. Software to find this, software to find that. What does it run on? Which is a lot of these guys don't know that actually runs on something that needs to be built. But anyway, I get challenged that if something happens and that supply chain, we could do the best marketing, but we're just going to build up demand for something we can't sell because we can't manufacture. So it's hugely difficult because we're in a hardware game. Which then comes back to hopefully the government somewhere, maybe they are looking at this. What can we bring back over? What can we manufacture in Europe or America? Or, this we could work close with America, so that I find it easier to order things from America than it is pretty much anywhere in the world at the moment. Go on plane and here the following morning, whereas I can't get stuff from Reading to Oxford in 2 days. It's a global world, and hopefully we're doing something to help that.
I mean, the semiconductor industry, to your point, has always been driven by volume. So it's always been driven by the laws of supply and demand. And you have a long tail for people making limited new products. But if you're a volume manufacturer, you command what you get, right? And it's been the same in the automotive sector or whatever volume sector. The thing that's changed, as far as I can see, in the last 5 to 6 years is various different governments have realized semiconductors is a critical national infrastructure and the geopolitical angle of it. So TSMC 1 is finished now in Austin. TSMC 2 is being built, and that's about the US building semiconductor resilience away from Taiwan, but using TSMC. Okay. They've also, on lithography, they've actually put a block on certain manufacturing equipment in China. which is slowing down China production on UMC and SMIC. So there are things that government legislation can do. Germany has been working very closely with global foundries in Dresden as part of the EU Chips Act. The US has also passed the US Chips Act. The UK will get to a Chips Act at some point when we develop and define our semiconductor strategy, which is, I'm hearing, not too far away. Yeah.
But there are success stories that out in Wales, the people making them, the Raspberry Pi and so on.
Yeah.
But we as one of the Granby we were told in meeting and trying onshore everything. So we have tried onshore stuff, but onshore can mean literally opening it up in a box. Official partners, so I know it's been onshore, it's been built in the UK. You know, we can get around it, but we did try and do that. But of course, cost comes into play. We're moving away from component availability, but you know, even just production. It would be nice to be able to do more in the UK. Do a sensible lead time, sensible cost, and hopefully move it away from certain regions where, let's say, IP regimes aren't quite as
we have a Newport, yeah. So we have a Newport with that makes compound semiconductors. So photonics, we have a leadership in the UK. So we're trying to extend that leadership in certain compound semiconductor applications as opposed to the bulk CMOS that everyone uses out of China, Taiwan.
Well, thank you very much, panel, for a very interesting conversation. I think time has passed on and lunch is beckoning. So thank you very much indeed for